Hello and welcome to another amazing interview that we got going on today. We are with Matthew Sanderson, who is one of the scenario writers for the new book out on Kickstarter right now. Definitely make sure to check it out. You can find the links down below if you haven't already. And we are going to tell you why you should back, if only just to get a taste of this scenario that Matthew's writing right here and right now. So Matthew, why don't you introduce yourself? You have a long history of writing for TTRPGs. I have a few of your books, but I feel no one does it better than you.
Oh, that's a lofty pedestal to put me on. For someone who doesn't like heights. Yeah, I've been writing for RPGs now for about the last 10 years. Started off, of all places, at a local convention where I got noticed by Simon Rogers, the head of Pelgrane Press. He was a guest of honour that had been invited to the convention, and then he and Graham Walmsley sat down and played my lonely Delta Green game that I was running. By the end of it, he stood up and said, well, I've done something right, that if this was written for Trail or the Easter Terrorists, then he would take it off my hands there and then and publish it. So I made a deal I'd write him an Easter Terrorist game, and if he liked it, then see what happened, and that was my foot in the door. Since then, I've gone on to write for a lot of the games that I enjoy the most. Call of Cthulhu, Trail of Cthulhu, Kult now, and Vampire the Masquerade. So yeah, they're all the big ones that were my formative years of starting to roleplay. I've now been able to luckily get to contribute a bit to.
And all the horror ones too. Are you just gravitating towards it? Is it your favorite genre?
Oh yeah, by far. I like the games that make me think, and I like the games that scare me. Those are the things that really grab me at the game.
They're pretty much all your babies, I'm sure. But if you had to pick one of these games to play as your horror go-to for the rest of your life,
ooh,
come on, you know the answer.
You're on playing actually when I go to conventions, I'm lucky enough that I have a friend of mine who does run a lot of Kult. So Kult is indeed my go-to playing game. Running Call of Cthulhu because I just do so much of it. But yeah, playing, I love to play.
That's awesome. The takeaway is Kult is best. I jest though. We love all the others. Delta Green, Call of Cthulhu, all these games. If you've mentioned, I adore and love the impact they've had in the horror genre for role playing games. Especially Masquerade has some wonderful pieces. But what are your influences? What kind of inspired you to step onto that role as a GM at that convention to terrify people?
Oh, I think mainly, especially on the convention circuit here, it can be sometimes very kind of hit and miss whether you get into a game or not. There's some conventions have a shortage of GMs. I remember going to a convention down on the south coast that used to be called Conception. It's now morphed into a different event called Contingency, where I turned up with this ideal version of I want to play all the games that I've always wanted to play. I finally get to sit down and have it, and pretty much every time I was beaten to the sign-up sheets, and the games would be full before I could get a chance to get my name up there.
Yeah.
So in the end, I decided, well, if I'm going to do something in every slot, I might as well run games. So I brought my whole back catalogue and then started running them and getting a bit of a following at conventions as a result from that.
Ooh, do you still run games at these conventions?
Oh yeah, loads. We have a regular Kult game actually at the convention I mentioned, Contingency. That started by actually doing the playtest of Judgement about 3 years ago. Ooh. And at the end of the session, all the players were like, "Wow, we actually want to continue playing with these characters." So we decided that we'd do a game that continues 1 year after the next, and we're now on about our third or fourth installment now. And I continue to write one-shots for Kult, but all link in slightly to the building meta plot that I'm building across these linked scenarios.
Oh, I mean, I'm just spitballing here, but campaign?
Oh yeah, it's definitely a campaign with they have a very definite goal that the players know they're working towards.
But can we also play? Is this are we going to maybe see this sometime in the future?
Well, if you guys want it, I'll write it.
Yes. So, Judgment. What is it about? What are its themes? Why should people play it?
All right. It's definitely what I'd call an adult scenario. Whenever I've run it, particularly at conventions, I've always put a note on there saying, yeah, adults only. This deals with some very heavy adult themes. Central to it is abortion. Mm-hmm. So it's definitely not a topic to tackle lightly. I like to think that it handles both sides of the debate, pro-life and pro-choice, equally and validly from their own perspectives, that it doesn't have a bias one way or the other. It just presents it as a very matter-of-fact theme within the game, the concept that very much is the driving force behind the events that start the scenario. But also in parallel to that, there's very much a theme of that there are no good choices, that there are just consequences and circumstance that you have to deal with. And sometimes you are going to get dealt one bad hand after another, and you just have to roll with it. And it's very much those making the lesser of two evil choices to get to the most favorable outcome.
Sounds like a tough scenario. But you've been running horror games at conventions for a while. And as someone who definitely enjoys running and playing at conventions, how do you go about approaching such sensitive material with possible strangers and just making sure everyone's like, okay?
I'm quite lucky that with the group of players I have access to, that it's normally the same group that come to me in combinations. Like some will go in one, some will go in another. That come to me wanting to play these games, and will normally pre-sign up ahead of time rather than it be open to the masses. And I know from experience and knowing the players over the years that I've run games for them, the kind of things that they will like, the kind of things that they'll want to steer away from. So it's not totally going in blind and then suddenly bringing up a topic that might be quite a sensitive issue to someone. I've got a fair bit of warning beforehand.
Excellent. That's always good to hear. So Judgment is part of this campaign that you've been running for some time. How much of it was like affected by the choices of your players, and or did you just kind of roll? Did you already have it written out by the time you brought it before them?
No, it was mainly came into being as a result of running that playtest session where they said that really we want to carry on with these characters, and it was left on a fairly grandiose cliffhanger, kind of a note. I've even written into the manuscript for the one-shot scenario to say there are possibilities for loose threads at the end that could be dealt with as part of a series of sequels. But I went with a fairly grand plot for the scenarios that followed, so that will keep them occupied for at least another few years.
Yes. And as someone who's kind of written for so many different role-playing horror games, how do you kind of approach each, I'm going to call them genres, but really like books, going between Delta Green to Call of Cthulhu to Kult? How do you the differentiations between approaching these?
I normally, you'd have to get into a very particular mindset for each one and think, this is the canvas I'm using, these are the tools I've got available to me. And I very much tailored obviously the game to the system. And generally, if I think of an idea, I'll try and think, well, which game does it match the best? So there are things like, say, the topic of abortion for Judgment. I wouldn't necessarily put that into a Call of Cthulhu scenario, for example, because that's more about cosmic horror rather than personal horror. In this case, this is because it's a very personal issue. Yeah, definitely. So it very much, if the idea will come to me, and then I can think, well, which one of the options I've got in terms of games will it fit into? Or if vice versa, if I've been given a brief to say, here we would like a scenario that involves X, Y, and Z, and I know it's going to be for, let's say Vampire or Cthulhu, then I can work with the tools in that game to then match what I've been given. You were talking about the Judgment and how they just loved the characters they were playing enough that they kind of pushed you to continue going for it. Who are these characters that are so enticing that you just have to play more of? I don't want to give too many spoilers, but I'll give a kind of rough overview. The opening scene of the scenario starts with in the last, maybe about an hour beforehand, a nice suburban family in Phoenix, Arizona, in modern day, in a heat wave, which is quite topical for today, considering I think it's the hottest day of the year so far. In sunny old England. But one of the daughters in the house, so you've got the mother, you've got the father, and then you've got 2 daughters. One of them sneaks in after hours. She's a bit groggy. The mother's been staying up late, worried where the daughter is, and thinks, well, maybe she's on drugs or she's got drunk or something. And there's an argument, things get heated, and finally the daughter just blurts out, "Look, Mum, I've just come back from an abortion clinic." At which point the proverbial hits the fan, and the 5th character in the set, her boyfriend, is basically given kind of read the riot act over the phone to say, you will get your ass to this house now. We need to talk.
Yeah.
And there's lots of different agendas and motivations between those characters. One of them may know a little bit more about the illusion than some characters might do from the start, as they're somewhere between sleepers and aware archetypes. So they fall in the middle between the two. This could very much be a group's first exposure to the illusion that would then set them on a track to do other scenarios. And in particular, one of the players who came up to me at the convention and said, "Look, I've seen you running Kult. I love this game, and I haven't seen anyone run it in years. Who do I have to kill to get a seat for a game?" He played the boyfriend, and he just grabbed it and ran with it so fiercely.
Yeah, that sounds like an intense first scene. Definitely particular to the Kult style. Was there any reasons you kind of chose to zero in on that kind of hot topic?
Yeah, it's one of the very first ideas that came to me when, even back way in the day when I read 2nd and 3rd Ed, that one of the things that massively appeals to me in any game system or any game setting rather is taking an issue which, if you see it through the lens of that particular setting, becomes something completely different. So in this case, as those that know the game, death is just another part of the illusion. It's another part of the machine and another mechanism of control. So if you put that in the hands of, say, a death magician, what is abortion other than just stopping the clock on someone's time in Elysium and sending them back to be reprocessed quicker than most? And what is a fetus other than just a piece of flesh, which is, again, in itself an illusion or a artificial construct in which to hold mankind?
Yeah, definitely.
So having that kind, what could be considered by, in normal human standards, quite a monstrous viewpoint, suddenly becomes something that you maybe not be able to empathize with, but can understand. That is a paradigm of mindset that really, really appeals to me in games.
Excellent. And so it sounds like this is like meant to inspire a lot of thought. And what would you say is the utmost question that you wish people or hope people kind of struggle with as they're playing this scenario?
I suppose, are they prepared to go to lengths that previously they would consider anathema? It's kind of how far can they push themselves to get out of the situation they're in? Some of the characters in their backstories have problems with certain things. The mother, for example, is a cop who's been in a quite violent incident in her past, and just the thought of getting into another gunfight terrifies her. So if it then comes to the point where she's having to draw guns on someone to protect herself and protect her family, can she do it? When someone learns that the faith that they have been introduced to is potentially nothing more than a lie and nothing more than a means of controlling her, what will she do in response to that? So it's very much push how far you're willing to push yourself to get out of a very horrible situation.
Excellent. That sounds super, super enticing. I can't wait to get my hands on the scenario. So it sounds like you pretty much have it written. What's is there anything left for you to do, or are you just coasting till the Kickstarter's done and everything goes to print?
Yeah, I mean, virtually the whole thing's done. I originally developed it about 3 years ago. It's had a bit of bouncing back and forth between myself and Peter, for example. He had a couple of suggestions on things to streamline it, to add here and there, and I think I've got maybe a couple of paragraphs left to finish off, and then I'm done.
So what are you because obviously there's hopefully going to be more in the future, and does the scenario kind of leave on that same sort of epic cliffhanger, or did you have it so it had more of a finality to it?
It's got multiple ways it can resolve. I like scenarios that don't necessarily, they all finish in the same way, because that can be a bit dull for a GM. I've had many instances where I've run games over and over and over again.
Yeah.
They've all gone kind of similarly, or they're gone the same way, and I know where it's going to end up, and it's kind of almost played by numbers at that point. So I like to write up situations which are kind of sandboxy, where it sets up the situation, has kind of bangs and things that you can bounce off, but where ultimately it ends up could be any one of a number of potential outcomes, or something that I haven't foreseen at all. So yeah, it's very open.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously the amazing argument before about why you should play, and it sounds like as a GM, this is definitely a scenario you can do over and over again with various endings, occurrences. What did you kind of put in the scenario that kind of encourages, that are, you know, special for the GM as they're reading or running it, that really kind of helps them create something that's all their own?
Yeah, I mean, I've put in characters that have motivations, not just obviously the player characters, but the non-player characters as well, so that you have an idea of how they're going to react in various situations. But they could be encountered in a whole range of possibilities by different combinations of characters at different times, in different orders, which will obviously influence what information the PCs have, and therefore will influence their decisions. And different locations people can go to, again, they can go to in any order. So it's very much, here's a list of what the PCs could potentially react to. Knock yourself out on how you present it to them, and obviously how they react to it, just run with whatever they do.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that's the argument for GMs. You definitely need to pick up the book for the scenario. So before we kind of head out, Matthew, what do you have to? What's kind of you're on this pedestal. We've given you the stage. The curtain is drawn. What have you to say? What are your last words?
Rabbit in headlights, then. No, I hope people obviously enjoy the game. There's a lot of good stuff that the Kickstarters put up there. I'm very excited for the Forbidden collection that's come up. Yeah, there's definitely stuff in there I want to run.
It looks so good.
Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff that I know coming in the pipeline. There's been mentioned on the Helmgas Facebook group. There's various other projects. I'm particularly interested in the Magic supplements coming later down the line. I remember the ones from Second Ed with their gloriously unreadable backgrounds. So having a book that I can actually decipher would be nice.
I totally understand. Well, thank you very much, Matthew Sanderson. Once again, if you want to check out his amazing scenario, make sure to check out Kult on Kickstarter. It's going on. We got 6 more days left. So definitely hop on. You're going to want to be on this gravy train, because it's going to be amazing. Matthew, once again, thank you so much, and always a pleasure.
No worries, my pleasure.